you all for settling down to a low roar. My name is Jeremy Tessman. I'm the gallery director and notional curator of this exhibition. It's really all Hank's work. I just swanned in at the end and took a little bit of credit at the very tail end. I'm so grateful and delighted to see so many familiar faces and a few strange ones. And I just want to share with you briefly, very briefly, a moment that happened to me today that puts this event into some context. A man came in who had set aside 2 Hank picture catalogs to buy. And he is the great-grandson of a man named Alexander Harmer, who is our community's 2nd resident artist, who arrived in 1892, who was excited to buy Hank's catalog. And this is a historic moment, and that was the reminder that this is a historic moment. And it's historic because we have Roger Durling, who has made the Santa Barbara International Film Festival a grand success. Is single-handedly helping to revitalize State Street with the new film center. So any community would be lucky, but ours is particularly so. And then Hank Pitcher, who decided 54 years ago not to stay in New York when they said, "You should come out here." He said, And so he came back and he became a professor, and then a stalwart artist, and then kind of an icon. And with that, I will say, please hold your questions till the very end, and join me in welcoming Hank Pitcher and Roger Durling.
Thank you. Before we start the conversation, I want to pay tribute to 2 groups. One is, she's in the room, Leslie Dunberg, the editor of the arts at the Santa Barbara Independent. And this cover story that you just saw is the 3rd story that Hank and I have done together for the Independent. So, I mean, we're indebted to the Independent for their gregariousness, showcasing this amazing artist, and also indulging me in writing for them. And then the other group, institution, is Sullivan Goss. Is the most amazing institution. I don't see this place as a gallery. I see it as a museum. I see it as a living room, an artistic living room. They not just show, I mean, they do not just sell art. They nurture artists, and it's unbelievable, remarkable what they do. And we're so lucky to have Jeremy Tessner, to have Nathan Gaunt and Susan Bush. What an incredible institution. So we'll start right off. When I was writing this article, Hank, I couldn't, and we started talking about the fact that you're reflecting a lot more in this paintings that you've ever done before. And I didn't tell you this. It made me think about Caspar David Friedrich, the German romanticist. He had a quote that I find so poignant. He says, "The artist should paint not only what he has in front of him, but also what he sees in himself." And that quote, just to me, speaks so nearly to what you have accomplished with this exhibit. How do you feel about that comment?
One of my mentors, Charles Garabedian, some of you may know, he had a great retrospective in the museum across the street. We used to always talk about painting as a way to discover who you are. So he was always so curious to see what his paintings looked like. And I mean, he really was genuinely curious about it. And I think in that way, a lot of artists look at their paintings in that way. And I think that's true. That you're the other idea I like that relates to that is the idea that, you know, painting is a way of discovering and at the same time developing who you are. You know, you make this painting and you go, whoa, look at that. And then you can kind of say, well, maybe I don't want to do that. I want to do something else. But I've noticed, you know, like, being signaled that I got to hold the microphone better.
Yes.
Yeah.
When we started, you know, me coming in to see the work, and I have seen so many of your exhibits before, and I pointed this out in the article, that the consistency of vision, this is the most cohesive show I have seen. I mean, your shows tend to be cohesive, but this is, to me, the most cohesive show that you have done. The singular vision and the thematic thrust of the show is so strong. Is that something that you intended to work on, or is just happened?
Well, I was starting to say, I remember what I was going to say, and that is that retrospectively, when I've looked at my work like 10 years later, or 20 years later, I go, oh, that was all about what I was feeling at that time. You know, you don't see it when you're doing it. I mean, for these paintings, I just ended up going to the same spot every day for, you know, about a year and a half. And you know, I've sort of made jokes about I want to make some paintings in the mountains, because there's all that incredible stuff right up there, and it's very close by. And I'll start out in the morning in my truck and head up to the mountains, but I end up at the beach. So I just ended up here, and I think what you're suggesting is that there was a lot of it brought back a lot of memories, and it's such an interesting place to be. So that's just where I ended up. You know? And it's not a lot of this stuff wasn't so easy to figure out. You know, when you get people in there and relationships with people and architecture, it takes a lot of time.
You did mention to me that this is the most reflective that your work has ever been. How did that come about? That this is such a reflective work?
Well, I guess it's just that there's so many triggers down there for me. You know, I mean, I've been painting down there for over 50 years, and I have had so many great experiences, and so things would happen. I'd see somebody or I'd see something, and it would make me think about other experiences that I had there. But I mean, one of the things that I've never wanted to have in my paintings, I'm not interested in, is, you know, kind of nostalgia and thinking about the past. You know, I want to sort of be here now, and so that was kind of a new experience too. You know, I'd see things. You know, I'd see. I mean, one of the interesting things was that I'd forgotten about is I think it's peculiar to Miramar Beach is the great perfume you can smell down there. You know, I mean, and so I'd be painting away, and occasionally you'd catch these little whiffs of really good perfume.
Did you get Stella McCartney perfume whiff?
Well, and one of the things that reminded me of is, it's one of the things that Susan really introduced me to, is really fine perfume. She's always been great at knowing just the right amount to wear. You know? And she was the first one to, for instance, to sell Stella McCartney's scent. And you know how evocative odors are, how evocative smells are. So, you know, I'd be painting away and I go, what's that? And then you can't quite tell where it came from. and then my mind would go back there, and then I'd have to go back and look at the painting.
Was it like a Marcel Proust?
Yeah.
When we meet, we talk a lot about movies, and we have a shorthand, you know, where we pick up right away. I mention something, and then he totally knows the reference. When I first walked into the studio and I saw this painting, in particular the one behind you, I said, Juliet of the Spirits, Federico Fellini, and the color. You know, can you tell us about that film and how influential Juliet of the Spirits has been to you?
Well, that I think is the single most influential sort of art experience for me. I mean, I can still remember vividly in the old Magic Land Theater in Isla Vista when I was still a student, and when that band, you know, that bright cobalt blue comes on there, and the thing starts and the music, and I literally would go and watch that movie every time it played. You know, when it came to town, before you could, you know, had videos, before you could live stream it or anything. And I've watched that movie hundreds of times, and every time I'd watch it, I'd see something different. And so I would do things, and this is where it's fun to talk to Roger about this, because he's such a student of how films are connected. You know, I'd watch a film and I'd say, oh, okay, and you know, it's his first color film. And I'd say, okay, I'm just going to watch where red is in it. And you'd see red at the beginning of the scene, and then it would pan over here, and then there'd be green, and then there'd be red, you know, and then it would pan back. And I would try to just watch that color, but then I'd get caught up in the story. And the same thing with the music, you know, how Nino wrote that, how incredible the music is. But the way that it's, the structure of the film, you know, the things that you don't, that are hard to pay attention to. You know, my favorite thing in good art, whether it's film or food or paintings, is when everything looks easier. You know, it just seems sort of effortless. And you know, that was something that art at the highest level was something that I was never really exposed to until, you know, like I was in college, really, and then I sort of learned about it. I guess one of the places that I saw that was, some of you remember Downey's Restaurant, you know, which was the first really amazing restaurant in town, where it got all those awards, and I became friends with John because my paintings were in the restaurant. So it was the cheapest place for Susan and I to eat because we had free food. so we ate there a lot. And going back in the kitchen and seeing how frenzied and crazy everything was, and then they're about ready to take the plate out, and he comes along and moves a piece of asparagus over a quarter of an inch. And when you're sitting in the restaurant, everything is so easy. Well, you know, I'm going on about this, but I have to thank Roger, because when they first opened the center, the film center, he didn't tell me this, but that was the first festival was Fellini, and I got to go see a print of it there. And that was really something.
It's funny you brought that up, because I did that Fellini retrospective just to indulge you and I. Because I said if anyone, I know two people that will show up and watch this Fellini retrospective, and we couldn't get Juliet of the Spirits in a restored way. And I kept telling Sean Pratt at the office, I was like, you have to get me Juliet of the Spirits in a higher definition. Going back to Juliet of the Spirits and the colors, and when we were talking about that, and in particular reference to the umbrella behind you, you said to me, all colors are value problems. When two things have the same value, then you start noticing hues. And I wanted to write about that, but I never follow up for you to talk to me more about that aspect. Can you elaborate?
Well, you know, in color theory, but also just generally in visual theory when, well, I mean, the basic idea is if you have twins and one of them has blue eyes and one of them has green eyes, that's all you see, right? And the more things are the same, the more you see the differences. So, you know, value is just how light or dark something is. And it's you have to learn about this, you know, and it's something I teach when I'm teaching painting. So, a lot of times when people haven't painted before, they'll make the yellow very light. Like if you imagine this in black and white, this would be white, and then this would be dark. But if this is really light and this is really dark, then you don't see the yellow and the blue. But the yellow, if you photograph this in black and white, this and this would be almost the same neutral gray. You know? But so you have one thing that's the same, it's the same value, then you can see the hue. Then you can see the hue. Is that?
No, absolutely, yeah. And
it's all,
yeah, no, go ahead.
you know, it's all that those sort of technical, formal aspects of painting and of film, you know, and of all art are the things that really do interest me. You know, how things are constructed.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So I usually ask my students, I say, do you know why women wear mascara? And they don't know that if you put black around your eyes, it makes the white whiter. You know? And you don't see the yellow or the red in it. You know? So it's all about those contrasts.
Mm-hmm. This is such a powerful painting, the one that you're covering with your big head. You know, tell us about how you arrived to it, and the colors are so powerful. We talked about the placement of the pole. You know, it could have become something phallic and destructive. Instead, it's just such a powerful visual.
Well, you know what I do. I mean, the way I paint is I go and I sit down and look around to see what happens, and most of the time without any preconceived ideas, and that's kind of the pleasure of going to the beach, right? You never know what you're going to see. But so I was sitting there and. I was looking in the other direction, and I turned around, and there was this yellow umbrella, and it was so. I mean, the color. It was such a color experience, you know. It was just such a sensual color experience. So I started painting it, and there was actually 3 girls lying down underneath it, and so then I had to kind of figure out what's going to be I've got this relationship between this yellow and the blue, and then what's going to happen down here. And it seemed, without going into all the details, but it seemed like there should just be one person, right? And just having that experience. But then there was that problem of that pole, you know? I mean, where does that pole go? You know, so I kept moving it back and forth, and moving her around, and finally tried to find a spot where it didn't seem weird. You know, it didn't suggest something other than just being there. That's just where she was lying. So,
and I was so struck when I first saw it, and I mentioned to you that, you know, the umbrella to me represented you and you sheltering Susan and your relationship with your wife, Susan, who was in the front row here, by the way. In case you didn't notice, you know, tell us about your impression of me pointing that out, how personal this painting is.
oh, well, I mean,
would you like another martini?
I love my wife.
Oh, we love your wife too. Whoever said that, thank you.
And I didn't think about that. I wasn't thinking about that at all. You know, when I made the painting, I wasn't thinking that I'm a yellow umbrella. But, you know, I mean, just suggesting that, you know, push the buttons on, you know, for me. And as she wrote, I mean, the whole reason I have this sort of relationship with Miramar Beach and a lot of things in my life is because I was so struck by her, and she said she'd move in with me if I got a house on Miramar Beach. I never would have gone to Miramar Beach. I mean, I really loved being down there, you know, and I got to know the surf break there, which I really liked a lot. And my friend Roy was in the audience, who grew up down there. You know, it was fun to exchange stories with him about it. And, but I'm trying to avoid your suggestion here.
One of the striking things about this painting is the forms, the shapes, the composition. And immediately after seeing this painting, I saw the proposal, the one that you guys are gonna have to turn your heads, is the black and white, well, it's mostly gray painting in the corner back there. And what was remarkable about seeing the two paintings next to each other is that we have always seen paintings of yours in color. And in a way, the color distracts us from the fact of the composition of the forms, the shapes that are so poignant and powerful in your composition. And in the proposal, we luxuriate in your forms and your shapes and your composition. Can you tell us about why did you decide to do grisaille, which is a technique that's been done for hundreds of years. In the Renaissance, you know, artists did grisaille, and you know, and I pointed out the story that Guernica, which is, you know, when you think about Picasso, you know, he did Guernica and grisaille. So tell us about why did you choose to do grisaille with this painting?
Well, one of the main reasons is that sometimes, well, my experience of being down there on that beach, or you know, my experience is that a lot of times it reminded me of like an old Cary Grant film. You know? I mean, it has that feeling of those beautiful old black and white films, and how beautiful the lighting is in those. And I was, you know, like I said, I go down there and I sit down, and somebody has a yellow umbrella, and I was sitting there, and this couple were sitting close by, and she got up to go in the water, and he rummaged around in his backpack and brought out those flowers and put them behind his back, and walked down there, and she walked up, and so I saw this whole thing, you know, and it was just too beautiful in a way. So I said, well, I got to figure out a way to paint that. So I sketched them, you know, it took a while to do it. But also, Seurat, you know, who did the Sunday afternoon round job. He's one of my favorite painters, but his drawings are really extraordinary. I mean, you know, these black and white drawings, and in those drawings, there's no lines. There's just this sense of both flat form and volume around the figures, and they're very much like how beautiful the light is in the great old black and white cinema. And so that was another inspiration.
But have you been? I mean, I'm sure that you're aware of the fact that most people think about your paintings in color, but it is in a way kind of distracts from the fact that the composition and the forms and the shapes, the painting is put together. I don't mean this distracts. It just means that most people are blinded by the color, and they don't pay attention to the high level of composition and form making in your painting.
Well, I think that's good. You know, I mean, you know, again, I think my idea and my experience and most of the paintings that I really love is that you're not aware of all the mechanics of it unless you're a painter and you're into it, you know. Like good cooks are kind of thinking about what all the tastes are. I don't like all that language about wine. You know, I like good wine, but when they go on and on about apricot and this and that, you know, I'm just totally uninterested in that. But as a painter, I'm interested in all of those details. So I try to kind of hide the mechanics of it. You know, I want it just to seem like, you know, like it was easy. And so,
going back to the proposal, where I couldn't help, I mean, the moment that I saw it, the fact that you were telling me that you've been painting on this beach for 50 years, the fact that Susan told you to get a house at the Miramar Beach before she would consider moving in with you. Good for you, Susan, to put perimeter boundaries right away. Well, she said, I said good for you, and that's a call for my dog. Did you understand, were you conscious of how pointed that painting is vis-a-vis your history? I mean, the proposal is happening on the beach.
well, there again, you know, when I have all these paintings, you know, Jeremy has sort of the final say in what goes up and what doesn't go up, and you know, he chose what paintings, and I hadn't really thought about that. I mean, you got a proposal, you got an anniversary over there, you know, and sort of the contemporary kind of culture down there, the influencer. I wrote a bunch of stories that go with this, and that I hope to publish sometime. There's a couple of them in that little booklet, and one of them was about painting from the deck of our cottage, and I saw the first mobile phone, and there was a woman we know who's also a model. She posed for Susan for her collection, Kate, and so I was sitting on the deck, and I didn't know her at the time. And there's a woman close to the water in a white bikini, and this giant white box. You know, it's like a loaf of bread with this big antenna sticking out of it. You know, and lounging on a chair and talking on that. It was such a moment of the culture at that moment. You know, and now you've got all these people walking around with these little things and broadcasting. So it's that kind of history of how things repeat themselves, and they're not the same, but they are the same.
I think you just deflected my question.
I guess I did.
Nice work. Regarding the rear window quality of all these vignettes that you painted, you know, I mentioned that there's a voyeuristic quality to your work. And when you look at all these little vignettes that are in the corner there where Jeremy stands, you know, there, and notice that the majority of the paintings have the aspect ratio of cinema. And I was quite taken about the voyeuristic aspect of you observing and taking on. I mean, all of those little paintings tell a story. This big painting tells one, the proposal tells a story. And it reminded me again of Julian of the Spirits, that everything starts without exposition. And what I love about your paintings is that like they start, and it's for us to decipher the story and make up the story. Yeah.
Well, sorry to go back to your previous question. I didn't have a narrative in mind when I but it's always fascinated me how when you're down on the beach, people really expose themselves. And, you really are
Literally, is it
exposed.
nudity?
Well, you know, there's not a lot of clothes on, and you're seeing people doing things, but there's a great deal of privacy at the same time. I mean, it's really kind of fascinating, but you never really know what's going on, but you're sort of seeing what's going on,
Yeah.
and that's always kind of, you know, fascinated me.
Mhm. Tell us about the impact and the relevance of painting in one's spot for so many years and getting to know the space in which you're in.
Well, a long time ago I read, and I have this blank about her name, I think it's Mary Tempest Winters, am I right, the poet? You know, I know it's Tempest Winters, but she wrote about this idea of, and I guess she grew up in Utah, sort of going back there and spending a lot of time there, and how difficult that was. You know? And she said that one of the ideas associated with that is that, you know, when you drive someplace, when you're on a road trip, you're moving and everything is standing still. But if you go and sit in one place for a long time, everything is moving. You know, you get to see all this movement. And what she said is that, so if you spend a long time in one place, if you sit still, then you develop an intimate relationship with that place. And then what I thought was so great about what she said was that, and if you don't develop an intimate relationship with that place, then you have a superficial relationship with it. So, and that sort of articulated something that I felt, you know, very well. How much place is important to me, you know, how much home is important to me, and how I like to return to the same place over and over again, you know. And I like that kind of intimacy in relationship to a place.
I'm also going to remind you of the quote we talked about, Carlos Castaneda, that says, when things shift in relationship to each other. And it refers to what you're saying, when you're standing in space, in one place, things start moving and shifting around.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You hold still and then everything starts moving.
Speaking of that idea, tell us about the rail and the fact that the sweet spot, I forget what you call it in surfing, and you lecture me about this.
Well, see, here's the thing that's fun for me.
Lecturing me?
Except for Julie of the Spirits, which I've seen so many times and I know so much about, but I discover something new about it all the time, is, you know, Roger spends a long time watching films over and over again, and he'll pick up on these things that clearly the director did, you know, placing things. I mentioned Charles Carabedian, such a fabulous, great guy, and he told me once that and he loved movies, especially old war movies. Howard Hawk, he loved Hawk, excuse me, and he said that he had this major revelation where at a certain point in his life he realized that he could watch the film as a director instead of as a spectator. You know, and relate that to himself as an artist that's making something. So the whole thing, when you brought up the railing, it had no significance to me, any symbolic significance to me. It was just, and I was trying to explain that in surfing, when you're out in the ocean, there's generally like one spot with it's the best spot to be when the waves come in. And the way you kind of locate that is by lining things up on land. You know, you line up the palm tree with the door or something like that. You know, and I kept returning to the same spot, and I used that railing. I'd line up that railing in relationship to a palm tree behind it, so then I could find my spot again. Because what's really remarkable is that the amount of sand on that one spot, varies like 8 to 10 feet over the year. It's really wild. There'll be these giant rocks, and then in the summertime there's no rocks, and it can vary day to day. So in order to kind of line up my spot, I would just look at that railing, and then. But then I think what you said about the significance about the railing is a way to get down and a way to get back and support and all of that. It wasn't conscious, but I think that's definitely there. I mean, I like that idea. I like seeing it that way.
No, whenever I saw it, I kept thinking of the aspirational aspect of it. That when there is an anticipation when you go to the beach, and the arrival, and then also the leaving, and I mean, symbols are figurative comparisons that are used in art to address higher ideas, and unconsciously or consciously you latched onto it, and I thought it was so powerful. Every painting, if you look at it for a few exceptions, is from that same point of view, and in certain, depending on the angle, the railing disappears, but the railing is actually there, and off the frame, etc. It's pretty amazing. Tell the audience the right spot, and what does it mean with surfing, which I find it fascinating.
Oh, well, the well, there's the lineup, and there's all this kind of, every sport, every profession, every discipline has sort of its language and its really peculiar little things, and the lineup, can be. I'll tell you a story.
I kept calling it the right spot, but it's the lineup. You dumb fuck, Roger.
In some places, in some places, the lineup, in some surf spots, that spot is really, you have to fight for that spot. And it reminds me of Susan's mother was the right table in New York was very important. It was really important to her. Her father told me when I got to know him a little bit, he said that he never invested in real estate, he invested in maitre d's. In surfing, there's some spots where there's a lot of competition because the waves come in and you want to get the best ride, and you know where the best spot is, and you don't want people that you don't like or that you don't know in your way, and there's a lot of interesting stories about all of that. One of my Should I tell a story about that? One of my favorites is that there's a place called Scorpion Bay, and it's an astounding surf spot. I mean, really astounding. And there's a lot of waves there, and it's very remote. You have to. It's hard to get to. It's a little fishing village, way out there. And some people sort of pioneered it. Some gringos, went down there and bought houses, and there was a sense there because it was so hard to get to, and the waves were so good that people took turns. You went out and you here, and the next person, the next person, the next person, and then other people found out about it and started to come down there, and the Santa Cruz surfers are some of the more aggressive surfers. There was a group of them that came down there, and there was a young guy and paddled out, and the first thing he did was paddle out and took off right in front of one of the oldest guys down there. He just took off right in front of him. He didn't say anything, and then paddled back out, and he did it again. And so this guy that lived there for a long time and was sort of part of this sense of sharing, and this is a mellow spot. You know, he paddled over to him and said, you know, we take turns here. You know? And the guy said, oh, you know, and was kind of told the guy off and profanely. And so this guy said, you know, you're a young guy, I'm an old guy, I can't fight you, you know, there's nothing I can do, but I'm rich, and I can have you killed and nobody
And this was Susan's father.
They flock to those tables.
When we talked about, and actually the quote made it to the booklet for this exhibit, we talked about Ken Burns. And Ken Burns, the documentary filmmaker, has a quote that he says, meaning accrues in duration. And it actually is featured in the booklet. Can you tell us the importance of that?
Well, I was, I've set up a studio, I have a studio at home, and we also, it's also where we watch TV. And so sometimes Susan and I will be watching film or you know, watching something, I'm painting at the same time. And there was a Ken Burns interview on, and I was working, and I heard him say that. It just really struck me. I thought that was so true, because it's, you know, it's putting in the time. It's spending that time, whether it's a relationship, you know, with someone that you care about, or whether it's, you know, whatever, your community, your friends, your spot, that it's sticking it out. You know? I used to always like this one beach that I grew up on. You know, there's a certain time late in the afternoon when it gets a little windy and everybody leaves. But then it glasses off after that, and that's the best time. You know? Instead of waiting for that windy spot to stop, and then you've got that good time when it gets glassy and the waves are a little better. So that's that duration, you know? Sticking it out, putting the time in.
Couple of last questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. You mentioned to me that normally the smaller size paintings where Jeremy's at, that size painting, in the past you would just paint for an hour for little vignettes. But this painting you spend weeks on each. Why did you have to spend weeks on the smaller paintings? That before you would just do them in an hour?
Well, you know, part of it was what precipitated all of this was this really nice situation where this guy wanted me to make a painting for his mother for a significant birthday, and in talking to her, she really loves the beach and just all those little stories and vignettes. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be great, instead of doing one painting, to do a bunch of little paintings? Because I love all those little things that happen. And generally I do bigger paintings when there's people in them. So I started doing that, and kind of for that reason. The other thing is that my favorite paintings, I think, of all of the history of art, is Indian miniatures, those Persian miniatures. Those are, to me, the sublime, the greatest paintings of all time. You know, just I love those little paintings. So, you know, I was kind of thinking about that. I was thinking about a collection of little paintings, but it's I stopped after a while because it just takes longer. It's harder to make a little painting than a big painting. And I like, using my arm instead of my wrist. So that's how that happened.
Okay, and the last question before I open to the crowd. When you and I met 3 times, 90 minutes, we kept using the term, actually you started using it, about, in regard to this exhibit, you use memorializing and reclaiming a lot during the conversation. Can you tell me the importance of those 2 words, vis-a-vis this work, memorializing and reclaiming?
Well, I have to say that I don't remember just and in fact, what I'm interested in doing in my paintings is not painting what something is like, but what something is.
Mm-hmm.
So, and like we were talking about earlier, I think sometimes that memories and can kind of get in the way of being there and being present to what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that's what, if I use those words, what I was talking about. At the turn of the millennium, I thought to myself, gosh, that doesn't happen very often. And I should do something about it. So I set out to do 100 paintings of Santa Barbara at the turn of the millennium. And I did that. And at first I made this big list. I thought of what would be all the significant things, things that are going to change. And then after a while I realized that didn't make sense for me. And I just painted what I did every day. It was sort of like where my truck took me that day and what was happening, like whether my kids were playing volleyball on the beach. And so I think in some ways what art can be and what artists can be is a witness to what's going on. And what you want is to tell the truth. Hugh Kenner, who I was lucky enough to study with when I was an undergraduate, said that probably the most valuable piece of film that you could possibly imagine is if somebody could go back to the Colosseum and have 30 seconds of film of what it actually looked like. And so in that way, I'm kind of interested in, and I guess it memorializes it if you try not to memorialize it. Whenever you try to memorialize something, then it becomes sentimental or nostalgic. And you want it to be real and authentic.
And I lied. I have one more question. I hope you guys are not bored. When I first met you in 2017, you were working on this exhibit, and you had just been in Scotland. And by the way, I went to Scotland after you talked so much about it, and I saw the paintings you did there. Sorry, Dan, my husband is in the front row, and he's to blame for the fact that we had to go to Scotland. You did this painting that it's a masterpiece. It hasn't been sold yet. It's probably one of my favorite paintings you've ever done. It's called Will You Marry Me? It's a triptych in a garden, and I've never been able to forget that painting, and I couldn't help but think about that painting vis-a-vis this exhibit. Am I wrong to see that there's a really strong connection between that painting and this exhibit?
Well, I mean, I clearly am kind of a sentimental, romantic person. And that garden was, that's kind of a longer story than I can talk about, but it was an extraordinary place. Some people I know invited me to go there to see it and to make some paintings there. And it was a 16th century place, and then it was added on to in the 17th century and the 18th century. And it had, it was just amazing, and she is a real gardening aficionado. So just walking around in this big estate and all these gardens, and then way in the back that you'd kind of like just stumble upon, there was the most perfect swing you could possibly imagine. She had like some engineer figure it out. It was in this big old oak tree. And on the swing, engraved on the edge of it, it said, "Will you marry me?" You know? And that kind of symbolized to me what somebody with incredible resources can do. You know, I don't know who else is going to see that. Not many people are going to see that, but it was just so perfect.
Well, although it's a garden, it's an English, a Scottish garden.
Well, that was actually in the English garden. So I went to St. Andrews and then went down to England to paint that.
Well, but what's remarkable is that we talked about self-reflection. When you look at that triptych, and it's a stunning triptych, you actually, there's so much personal stuff that you imbue the painting.
Well, I just sort of identified with all of that. I mean, I really admired what they did, you know, and what they could do and what they ended up doing. You know, that was really, really something to see that.
Okay, let's open it up. Yes, go ahead, Leslie.
Wow, Leslie.
Oh, great. So my question is about detail. One thing I see in almost all of your paintings really is there are sections of pretty intense detail, and then areas where the detail is not there. It's very soft or, you know, much more impressionistic.
The question is about the detail in the paintings and how parts of it is not as detailed.
So can you talk about how you choose where to indulge in that detail and where not to put that in?
You know, it evolves as I'm working on the painting. You know, sometimes you just need something in a certain spot. You know, I mean, it was like in this painting, you know, having these two shapes, you know, be the same shape, but one green and one white. You know, that's kind of a detail that evolved as I made the painting. I didn't want the edges to be boring. I wanted that to be something that was about the rhythm of the painting. And so it's not something that I think about that consciously, except that you know, you kind of know when. Well, to go back to this idea of landscaping, you know, I really like good gardeners and people that really understand landscaping. And one of the things I love that they say sometimes is that, well, this wants to be over there. You know how they bring these pots of flowers and they set them around? I'm not really good at laying out landscaping, but I just love it. Well, this wants to be over there. And the same thing happens for me in painting, you know. This wants to be a little more in focus, you know. So it's trying to get into the rhythm of the painting.
Which I'm glad, actually. Thank you, Leslie, for bringing that up. You know, the rosewood Miramar in the paintings tends to become an archetype. It becomes, you know, it's out of focus in most of the paintings. You know, tell us about that aspect and how the light just catches the archetype, the architecture.
Well,
you don't have to be nasty about it.
We can do that for you. Amen.
well, you know, I painted that so many times, and it was just so wonderful to paint it, those old blue roofs. And so when it was remodeled, it's very different now, you know, and it's in the background, you know. So I was trying to figure out, well, how am I going to deal with that? And then I noticed that, you know, when the light hits it in a certain way, it becomes this big shape. So it's sort of like in Amarcord, you know, when that big ship comes in. You know?
Back to Fellini.
You know, it's this big shape and this big archetype, and they have that Yeah, this big resort, you know, and it's this place with all this sort of light, and so that's how I figured out how to have that as part of the painting.
And follow up to the shades, the perpendicular light, and how most of your characters in the paintings are in the shade, which actually recalls Julie of the Spirits, because most of the characters in the movie are in shade.
Well, that was something, the last time I saw the film, after not seeing it for a while, was I noticed that I would say over 50% of the significant scenes, that the main characters are right in the foreground, and they're totally backlit. You know, they're silhouettes. And you can see a little bit. I had never seen that before. You know, you just have this big shape in the front, and then all this stuff going on in the back. You know, and that's always been one of my favorite things about the film, is looking at all the people in the background and seeing what they're doing. You know, they're dancing and all that stuff. And the same thing when you go to the beach. You know, it's just all these little vignettes, all this stuff sort of happening.
Yeah, and there is something amazing about Santa Barbara beaches, that because of we're not, you know, the angle in which the beaches are.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing, is that having, you know, most beaches in the world, the sun comes up over the ocean and sets behind you, or vice versa. So you're either in full light or in full shade. But in Santa Barbara, the light's all from the side, so there's much more of a sense of volume to the things that you see.
And far more romantic too.
Yeah.
It's cinematic.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Diane.
First, I'd like to thank you so much, you and Susan, for doing this.
Oh,
Yeah, really appreciate you
Thank you
guys.
so
They're
much.
iconic human beings in this town. But I want to ask a question. You're so seemingly private, and you talk about nostalgia, and you talk about sentimentality, and yet the colors you choose are so wildly beautiful and bright. You know, there's nothing demure about your work. Is that somehow the balance of being so, like, delicately, beautifully protective of what you love? Like, yeah?
Good question, Diane.
Well, I think I would go back to what I said earlier, is that I'm trying to paint what it is, you know, instead of what it's like, you know, and just to kind of like to be there and to see it and to talk about what I'm seeing, you know, and kind of to be in that present moment.
Yeah, it was beautiful, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Roger, for doing this with Hank. And Hank, I want to note that what you said about staying in one place and everything moving around you was really what I've always thought about you and your paintings over all these years. Because you go to the beach, you go to the landscape, and you see new stuff in the same places. And it's epic in a way, because it's never the same. But your duration over all these decades, I just want to thank you and appreciate you for that.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Yeah.
We should be wrapping up. Last question, Leslie. Let's go.
This is more of an emotional, sentimental kind of
Don't
category
make us cry.
question.
We don't want to cry.
This would be a good time to go to the bathroom. It's changed a lot. Miramar has changed so much. When I was a student at Kate School in the early 70s, my mom would come up from Hollywood and stay at the Miramar. And I always thought it was so romantic, you know, and it's just a beautiful little place. And so humble and workmanly, like you were talking about in the article. Do you see that, the loss of that, and the sort of the slow evolution of how that beachfront has become so affluent and almost inaccessible to the middle person? Do you see that with some regret? And also, thank you for documenting those early years so that we can remember them.
Did everybody hear the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
One of my other favorite beaches is Refugio, and those of you that know that beach know that the trees aren't there anymore. And that wonderful trellis was cut down by this new gardener that thought he was just, cleaning it up. And I was telling this friend of mine about how sad I was about that, because that was such an idyllic, incredible spot. And he said, Hank, lighten up, and what he said was, things change, things evolve and things change, and the next generation, the next people have to figure out their relationship to that place. And I think that one of the things that good painting and good writing and good art can do is, a long time ago, I ended up at some dinner party, and I was sitting next to a guy that was a government official in Palestine. And his job was, he was going to Afghanistan and trying to become friends with people there. So he'd go and he'd park his car and he'd put everything out, so it was, because he knew people were watching him, And then he'd go and he'd sit. Sometimes he'd sit for weeks, and finally somebody would come down and talk to him. And what he wanted to do, he realized that that for the last 2 generations, people only knew war. That they only knew war. And it was really important he wanted to talk to the people that knew Afghanistan and knew that before there was war. And he said that he believed in the importance of stories of peaceful times. And that's really struck with me, and it's been kind of my excuse for making paintings of beautiful places, because a lot of times, especially growing up during the Vietnam protests and stuff like that, I wasn't marching and I felt guilty in some ways that I wasn't protesting for that. But then I also felt that it's important to witness this other stuff that's going on, so that people in the future can see that, not as a documentation. And I mean, sometimes some of the things that go on in Santa Barbara really piss me off. I mean, really.
We're among friends here.
There's a live microphone.
When I was in college, in order to pay for it, I worked in construction. I worked insulating houses, a horrible job. And one Friday after doing that job, to make enough money to paint and go to school, I drank too much. And I had this simmering anger about what had happened to Isla Vista, where I grew up, which was such an idyllic place. I mean, it was so sweet and idyllic and natural. And it was at a time when they were just building all these apartments, and everything was just, it was ruined, And it was sort of like somebody had taken my childhood away. And I got so angry that I went out, I was very strong, and I went all around Isla Vista tipping over cars. And I got in a lot of trouble for it. So painting is a way of not tipping over cars.
Your friendship and getting to know you is one of the highlights of me being here in Santa Barbara. So thank you for this chat. Thank you, everybody.